Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Allbound Revolution, where we make marketing and sales speak the same language. Let's get into it. Today, we are diving into a critical topic for businesses everywhere: how to fix a broken buyer journey before it impacts your pipeline. We're thrilled to have two experts joining us today. We have McGaughey, Senior Allbound Marketing Strategist at Rev Partners, and Cameron Collins, RevOps Strategist at Rev Partners. So let's get right into it. And I want to start asking Melissa, with your extensive background in content marketing and sales enablement, what are some telltale signs that a company's buyer journey is broken?
Sure, that's a great question. So typically a lopsided pipeline is a good indicator. So if you're getting a lot of top of funnel leads, none of them are translating into opportunities or turning into customers, then that's a pretty good indicator that your buyer journey needs somebody to take a look at it and some adjustments to be made.
Okay. How can businesses use data-driven decision making to spot these issues?
Sure. So you can't easily identify the issue without tools like HubSpot in order to identify where folks are falling to the wayside within your buyer's journey. So implementing a tool so that you can put the right technology into place to get an understanding of where folks are falling out of your buyer's journey or where they're falling out of the funnel, that would be where I would definitely start.
Yes, I think it's really complex because you can have all these leads at the top and then all the way to the customer. It's like sometimes we're talking about really long sales cycles. So spotting where is the place where these people are falling out, I think without the data, it gets really, really hard.
Sure. Well,
Mapping
and
it out.
even before they get to the deal stage sales cycle, there's the prospecting phase where you have an awareness, consideration, and decision phase, and folks are moving through those stages before they even become an opportunity and enter the deal stage. So if you don't have the right technology in place, then you can't track the full buyer's journey. So from the point where they become aware of who you are, after they realize that they have a problem, to the end game when they become your customer.
Okay, awesome. Cameron, as someone with a strong background in sales and RevOps, can you explain how a broken buyer journey directly affects a company's sales pipeline?
Yeah, the definition of revenue operations is the science of sustainable revenue growth. And what that means is that you need to be able to measure everything that's happening in your company in order to grow sustainably, in order to generate more revenue. And if you have a broken buyer's journey, which can look like anything from simply not measuring your data to not having things operate in your CRM in a way that represents things in real life, then all of that contributes to loss of revenue. And again, that can manifest in any number of ways, but ultimately you have to be able to measure things and you have to be able to make sure that your CRM is doing what you want it to in order to capitalize on every dollar that's coming into your pipeline.
Totally. This is super exciting because I feel we have the marketing side and the RevOps side, and it's intertwining finally. And in terms of measurement, I'd like to follow up, Cameron, if that's okay. What metrics should teams be monitoring to measure the health of their buyer journey?
Well, the first one and the most fundamental metric is going to be your customer lifecycle stages. If you don't have those set up correctly in HubSpot, then you're already starting at a loss. Setting up your lifecycle stages correctly, there's quite a few things that can be involved with that, but I think the most simple takeaway for everybody is simply to define what every stage means. And I mean literally creating inclusion lists that have the criteria for what every stage is, and then making sure that your lead is defined by those criteria and those triggers. And you do that for every single stage so that everyone knows what an MQL is, what an SQL is. Is a customer when the contract is signed, or is it when the revenue is received, right? So you don't want any of this to be ambiguous, and having everything documented and used with inclusion lists in HubSpot is the first step. And then you can take that philosophy and apply it to all other metrics, sales stages, conversion rates, and many, many more.
That's amazing. And it makes a lot of sense. We were talking about vanity metrics another day, and we were talking about how an MQL can be so many things across companies, and that becomes a problem. And in that sense, I'd like to discuss a little bit about cross-functional alignment. So, Melissa, how crucial is cross-functional alignment to fix a buyer journey that is broken?
Sure, it's mission critical for sure. Going back to what Cameron said about making sure that you have all of your life cycle stages defined. I've worked with partners in the past whose internal marketing team and internal sales team were both operating from differently defined MQLs, SQLs. And so in that case, marketing was saying, we're bringing in X number of MQLs, and then, a certain percentage of those are turning into SQLs. Why aren't you working our SQLs? And then the sales team would come back and say, well, your SQLs aren't SQLs because they don't meet X, Y, and Z criteria. So in that instance, everyone ends up with a headache. Nobody meets their goals, and it's a real problem. So in order to have your buyer's journey function effectively and efficiently and in a way that is going to help your organization meet revenue goals by the end of the year, every decision maker within each department needs to be in the loop when it comes to defining those life cycle stages and on board with what the outcome is in order to move forward.
A question came up to me. How hard it is to define these life cycle stages, because we're talking about people and we're trying to measure it with numbers and very specific criteria. And I can think of many situations in which this criteria might escape the human factor, right? Or the unknown.
Sure. That's a good question. Go ahead, Cameron.
I was going to say it's easy to build. The difficult part is to have the conversation and get the alignment. And that's because, to Melissa's point, oftentimes marketing might think they're doing quote unquote the right thing, and sales thinks that they're doing the right thing, and each team is doing what's asked of them, but they're not aligned with cross-functionally what always the other team should be doing or what is the right thing. And that goes up all the way to the stakeholders, where maybe you have a VP of marketing who has their goal and the VP of sales has their goal, but they're not working in tandem. And so they're not having conversations where marketing says, we think this is what an MQL is, and sales pushes back and says, actually, we think that this should be the definition. And then they come to that consensus. And so it's not difficult to bring up those conversations, but the difficulty is the fact that those conversations often never take place. And so you can't start if you don't at least open the dialogue.
That's amazing. And we've talked about how to make these conversations happen. And I think a QBR is a great place for these conversations to happen. But I don't know if you these conversations should be happening more often than every quarter, right?
Yeah. Ideally, the conversation should happen before you even get to the QBR stage, because if you get to the QBR stage and you're trying to report on your metrics, like your conversion rates and your MQLs and your SQLs and how many ops you've generated within that quarter that have turned into customers, that have turned into revenue dollars, if you open up your QBR and present it to a partner and nobody's on the same page, they're going to be like, this means nothing to us. So ideally, you have that conversation right up front first thing and get alignment so that when the time for your QBR comes, you're reporting on the right metrics and you're wowing the partner instead of, making a big question mark appear over their head.
Yeah, that sounds great. Can you share an example of how improved alignment transformed the client's buyer journey, or is it still the utopia?
Let me think for a second. So I worked with a partner in the past in a different life, and they were a large corporate beast, and they had acquired a bunch of different brands, and their sales team They had acquired multiple sales teams with multiple processes, some of which were using Salesforce sparingly, and the majority of which were using nothing. They didn't have a CRM. They weren't even using spreadsheets. We were starting from like the ground up. All of their sales knowledge was like, they're like, oh, it's all up here. Well, we can't measure that, to Cameron's point, and then we can't leverage that data to go to market with.
Mm-hmm.
And so the initial initiative was to first implement HubSpot and train the sales team very foundationally how to use it. And secondly, part of that training was training all teams what the buyer's journey marketing is and what the process is, and how to like defining those life cycle stages. So getting all of the key stakeholders and decision makers into a room and going through that process. And then once implemented, I mean, the C-suite was blown away by the types of reporting that we could generate, and the visibility that they had into the buyer's journey during the prospecting phase, and then beyond that into the sales cycle and the deal stages, because they had transparency and visibility where they hadn't had it at all in the past.
Wow, that's a great success story from nightmare to dream. And Cameron, being on the other side of the bow tie, what can you say about alignment? Is it hard?
The hard thing is making sure that you open the dialogue without being afraid to address things that have been broken potentially for a long time. A lot of companies and partners that I work with and that Melissa work with, they've been around for a long while before we're coming into the picture. And so there can be resistance when you're coming in and saying your life cycle stages are broken for XYZ reasons. And part of how we alleviate that, and this is just what our job is to make sure that we tailor the messaging for how it benefits them so that we can open those conversations without resistance. The easy part is the implementation. The hard part really is the alignment. But I think the other side to all of this is making sure that you revisit all of these elements on a somewhat regular cadence. So life cycle stages aren't going to change every single quarter, or at least they certainly shouldn't, but they are prone to changing once in a while. And so at least once a year, we go in and we reassess what life cycle stages look like or what sales stages look like. And we make sure that all of these metrics that we have defined previously still hold up with how the business is functioning today. And it's the same conversation all over, but again, just not being afraid to bring up those conversations and make sure that you start as early as you can to be able to implement that change.
That's great. And in that sense, we have talked a lot about how to leverage technology, how to leverage HubSpot and other CRM systems. And I'd like to ask you, Cameron, in your experience, can you give us like a small example of how they can leverage these CRMs to mend gaps in the buyer journey?
I mean, I think that one of the most stark reasons that any company should leverage HubSpot as much as they can is simply because it gives you the opportunity to consolidate your tech stack. And most companies can't ditch everything and then like go full stop right away, but they can make those transitions over time. And so doing everything you can to make sure that sales goals are in HubSpot, making sure that just the buyer journey is documented and that documentation lives somewhere in HubSpot, right? Having as much of your business and your processes in one place help to alleviate issues that arise from things being disjointed. And the final thing I would add, which this is a very general sense, but it definitely plays into the utilization of technology where it often gets skipped, just documenting your processes and your training. So again, whether you do that in HubSpot or an app like Supered, there's a lot of opportunities for documentation and most companies are not doing that.
Can you talk to us a little bit about Supered? Because I don't think if everyone listening to this will know.
Yeah, well, Supered's a third-party app. It's a Chrome extension. It's totally free. You can just go and type in Supered Chrome extension or supered.io. And when you install the Chrome extension, it allows you to add icons throughout your HubSpot instance or really any website. And the icons are connected to text, which allow you to have training modules pop up. So, for example, if you have life cycle stages and you want to have what your definition of a lead, MQL, SQL, etc., you want to have those definitions written out and maybe add in a video explaining each of those stages, you can have Supered look for the text that says SQL or lead, and then a little icon pops up. And so if somebody has a question for what does this mean, that documentation actually lives now inside the CRM. So it's a really great way to document your processes and put them right in front of people without ever having to leave.
Okay, so like digital multimedia post-its.
That's it. That's exactly it.
And are there any emerging technologies or trends that you're particularly excited about for improving the buyer journey?
You know, I don't think we'd be able to get to the end of this episode if we don't at least mention AI. But the thing is, I'm excited about it, but it's a double-edged sword. And so I think a lot of people really do get excited about it, and I probably could talk about that and have a lot of people nod their head in agreement and say, yes, you're right. But I think that why we get excited about things like ChatGPT are probably fairly obvious to a lot of people at this point. You know, you can create dummy data for testing and have it analyze things and do all kinds of cool stuff. What I would actually throw in is a caution where people should be excited for a lot of the emerging technologies that are out there, but don't let it come at the expense of doing the basics, because a lot of companies chase these emerging technologies, but they haven't defined life cycle stages yet. They haven't made sure that their sales stages are set up properly. So the short answer is yes, there's a lot of emerging technologies I'm excited for, but I think that it's important that we go back to the basics and make sure that our listeners really focus on that.
Actually, so it's funny that you mentioned that, Cameron, because I agree completely. And I actually saw a relevant meme today around ChatGPT, and it was like when I'm having a day where I'm feeling kind of yucky about how intelligent I am, then I remember that I got my bachelor's degree without ChatGPT. And that's kind of like what you're saying is like, don't forget to put in the work and do the foundational stuff. AI is there as a tool for use to like help us out, make us be more efficient, but you can't put the cart before the horse.
Definitely.
I totally agree.
We want to fly and we don't know how to walk.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. Throwing more money at AI is not going to solve most of the problems that companies have.
Yeah, totally agree. And then I'd like to ask a couple more questions before we wrap up. But Melissa, I know you have a lot of experience crafting content marketing strategies. I've been part of those strategies at some point, and it's been amazing to work with you. I've learned a lot. So do you have any examples of successful workflows that nurture, warm up cold leads and close more deals?
Sure. Yeah. There are a few things, like a few go-tos to try. So for top of funnel folks, so folks that are visiting your website and maybe they subscribe to a newsletter, doing something like a welcome workflow, like a welcome email sequence that basically is a email drip campaign that delivers valuable information about the solutions that you provide and how they could benefit the end user that subscribed, giving them the option to identify their preferences in terms of content. So if you have multiple industries that you serve, multiple solutions or products, giving them the opportunity to select which ones they're most interested in, and then within your workflow, building out paths where you can deliver that type of content to those individuals dependent upon the preferences that they indicate to you. There are things more mid-funnel, like behavioral lead nurtures, triggered by things like lead scores and the content that they visit that they indicate that they're interested in, maybe pushing them towards requesting a demo, doing a free trial, talking to somebody to try to get them into that next phase, whatever it is within your life cycle stage and your buyer's journey that you've identified between marketing and sales and service, which we haven't talked too much about today. And then from there, on the other end of the pipeline, re-engagement. So if you've got closed loss deals or contacts associated with closed loss deals, changing their life cycle stage back to an MQL with a status for nurturing could be beneficial. So putting them into like your monthly email newsletter, or in addition to that, queuing them up into a sales sequence that is triggered or scheduled to go out like within the next 6 months to a year, just kind of asking them how they're doing with their current solution and updating them on any development on your own or the benefits of your own, just to get back in front of them to see if they aren't happy with the solution that they picked over yours, why not revisit you? Those are just a few things off the cuff.
That's amazing. And thank you so much for being here. I think we need to wrap up the episode for today. But anyway, I'd just like to make a little mention because I'd love for the listeners to check out Cameron's project, the Admin Arena. So I want to add a link down there in the description. And I just want to close with a quote I found that simplifies everything for me, at least from a content perspective and perhaps from the strategy too, which is the buyer journey is nothing more than a series of questions that must be answered with our actions, right? So thank you so much for being here. I hope to see you on next episodes, and I hope the audience enjoys listening to this very niche, very spectacular information. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.